Hi, James.
Hey, Adam.
What was your first computer?
How did I know you were going to ask me that? So, the first computer I ever used in any significant way was a TRS 80. Remember those?
Oh, it is
Yeah.
also called trash, right?
Yeah, Trash 80. My mom sent me to a computer summer camp one year when I was very little. And we basically just played games on it. We didn't do any kind of programming or anything.
Okay, how
So,
little were you?
um, I had to be probably about 10 years old, maybe, something like that.
What kind of games were there?
On the Trash 80, they were pretty much text-based games, maybe some ASCII art here
Mhm.
and there. A lot of like, question response, like you're coming up to a branch in the path, which way do you go? Those kinds of questions. And I think there was a really popular one that was on TRS 80. I just can't remember the name.
But I mean, still good, right? For kids.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
We get to play with the floppy disk
Oh
drives.
yeah.
I was
So you could
the five
load
and a
you could
quarter
load the
inch.
games with a floppy.
Yeah, yeah. So I had the 5 1/4 inch. So it advanced well beyond the old legacy 8 inch.
Mhm.
So we were cutting edge. That was at a summer camp.
And okay, so what happened after the summer camp? So you got your machine and started hacking or playing games, or what was this? Your road to computer,
Yeah.
no?
So the first computer I ever owned, my parents bought me a TI 99 4A system, which was where I learned to do basic programming, typing in programs from like Byte
You
magazine.
had to, or you
Um,
wanted to?
no, I wanted to. Yeah, yeah. I asked for it. I asked for a computer. I didn't really know what I was asking for at the time,
Okay.
but and also I had some family members that were much older. They were teenagers or early 20s, and they were working on. They had a they created this way to create color photos from a black and white
Hmm.
scanner, where they basically put three different filters in front of a picture, and then they kind of merged it all together into a color photo. So that was pretty cool. I thought that was really interesting. So, and they kind of helped me get interested in computers and things like that. So,
So you had no interest in
um,
games. So after the summer camp, you say no, enough with text-based gaming. Now it's start to coding, right?
yeah, I mean, like every good computer interested person, I always liked games, but I didn't really have an interest in like coding games or creating them. I just like to play
Mhm.
them. I was more into like the networking between different computers. Like I had a BBS. I ran a BBS for a number
Mhm.
of years out of my bedroom. So we were like sharing software and stories, and we had message boards and things like that over a dial-up modem. I think it was 1200
Mhm.
baud was my first actual modem. So yeah, and then let's see where did I go from there? Yeah, I took a few programming classes in high school. I actually learned like two's complement mathematics in I think it was seventh
Mhm.
grade, where we had a bunch of apples in this Apple Macs, or I guess they were official Macintosh
Mhm.
computers, and learned how to the basics of computer architectures and things like that. So then I just kept going through it and studied computers in college. I have a computer engineering degree. Took a number of classes. I really liked the the intersection between like the hardware and software, which is I think how I ended up with my first job at Sun, because it was neither hardware nor software, right? It was
Okay.
both.
Which
So
which
it's an
programming
operating
languages you
system.
learned, in the journey? So you already said on the first computer it was the TI. What is it? TI 9, you say?
Yeah, TI 99/4A. I don't know, some model number. It was a really well TI Texas
Mhm.
Instruments, and it was one of their best-selling models. And I learned BASIC on
Mhm.
that one, and then I'm trying to think. I think in mostly in college we used C, C++. I did some uh,
Mhm.
Lisp, as well as Fortran, and I didn't really get into like Java and JavaScript till much later in my career. I think we used Java a little bit in my last year because it had just
Mhm.
been released like the year before I graduated college. So yeah, most of it was traditional C programming, Fortran.
And what was your favorite language back then?
My favorite language back then, probably assembly.
Oh, really?
to, yeah, honestly, I mean, I took a computer architecture class, did really well in it. There was a lot of assembly programming on the Motorola, the 60
8,000.
was it? Yeah, 68K. Did a ton of that. Was pretty good at it. I actually became a teacher's assistant the next semester in that
Mm-hmm.
college in that class, and my primary job was to catch cheaters,
Oh.
catch people like copying and pasting code, and yeah. But yeah, it was probably my favorite because it was like, there's no there's no like it's just pure
Mm-hmm.
programming, and you see the bits go, and you see the registers get values, and it's very, very satisfying to create a program that actually does something useful in assembly.
And after university, you studied at Sun.
Yeah, so I got a job at Sun. I was in the Solaris QA
Oh.
department.
Mm-hmm.
We were basically doing certification testing for the different standards that
Mm-hmm.
Solaris had implemented, like POSIX and what was the other one? Open Unix, or yeah, Unix
Mm-hmm.
Open, and a few others. And so we were developing and running
Mm-hmm.
tests for that. And I was sitting in the same hallways as, like, I don't know if you know Brian
Mm-hmm.
Cantrell, who one of the inventors of dtrace, um, Roger Faulkner, who invented the proc file system. He had my last name, so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably how I got the
Mm-hmm.
job. But yeah, so I was in the Solaris group, and then I started to do I started to work on the installation administration tools in Solaris. So like package
Mm-hmm.
management. You may have heard of the SVR4 packaging format, kind of like RPMs of
Mm-hmm.
today, or Debian, or pick your favorite package manager. Solaris had its own. It's called SVR4. Based SVR was System 5, Release
Mm-hmm.
4, back from Bell Labs from forever ago. So we were working on some of the tools for managing packages and patches.
And
Yeah.
you wanted to work for
So,
Sun Microsystems, or was it more like accidental,
well, so it's an interesting story actually. I went to the University of Florida
Mm-hmm.
in Gainesville, the Go Gators, and they had a CS department. They still have a CISE department, but Sun Microsystems at the time didn't typically hire from those, like it wasn't like a well-known school like CSU or Brown
Mm-hmm.
or Stanford. It just so happened that my hiring manager at the time was also a UF graduate,
Mm-hmm.
so he came back to the school to sort of give back a little bit and give us a chance. So I interviewed with Sun. I interviewed with you name it. Back then everyone was hiring. Intel, Microsoft. There's a bunch of defense contractors in Florida, and yeah, it just so happened that Sun was there interviewing. So I interviewed and did well enough. Flew out to California, did another round of interviews. I had a big giant Java 1.0 book that I read on the plane. And sure enough, in my interviews, I got, show me how to do a linked list in
Mm-hmm.
Java. So on the whiteboard, those kind of questions. So I had not really used Java. As I said, it just released the year before I graduated. So that was a fortuitous that I got to read the book and get a job right out of college. But it was not that
And this was
difficult at the
before
time.
new linked list, right? Because right now you can say, okay, new linked list, and you're done, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's we learned a lot about algorithms and
Mm-hmm.
sorting algorithms and how to program them in any language,
Mm-hmm.
really. Sort of the basic concepts. So yeah, it wasn't that hard of a stretch to get to Java. And I'm pretty sure the people that were interviewing me had never used Java before
Mm-hmm.
either. They were just It was the hot new thing at the time, right? It's like it just released in
Mm-hmm.
'96, and yeah, so I got a job at Sun.
And you moved to California then?
Yep, in Menlo Park. I lived all over the Bay Area. But yeah, as I said at the
And you
time,
miss
lots
Florida,
of
or you
companies are
prefer
hiring.
California? So, I mean, what?
I think California is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It was very expensive to live there
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and I had met my wife in college. We were not married at the time, but she was also from Florida, so she ended up moving out to California with me, and then we got married a year later, and then spent 5 years in the Bay Area, but ultimately decided to move
Mm-hmm.
back because we're both from here and we have family here as
Okay.
well. Yeah.
So, so you spent five
So
years at Sun Microsystems. So it was until 2001.
I actually spent 13 years at
Okay.
Sun. It was, as I said, I was really interested in sort of the intersection between hardware and software. That meant an operating system, and so that's kind of why I chose that particular job. But yeah, I spent 13 years there. I didn't always work on Solaris. In 2008 was when I first joined an actual Java
Mm-hmm.
group. This is the beginnings of the Java Enterprise System, or JES as we
Mm-hmm.
called it, which was basically our stack, right? Our middleware stack from Sun that had an app server, a name, an identity server. We had a portal
Mm-hmm.
server as well, and a bunch of other, some business process automation software in there. So I joined that group working primarily on the installer for it because it was just this massive, collection of like 13 products that had to get laid down on a
Mm-hmm.
system. So we wrote the first Java installer for that.
Mm-hmm. And then what you did at Sun? So you just.
Yeah. So then I think that was in
Mm-hmm.
2008. That was well beyond when the end was near for
Mm-hmm.
Sun. So we started to basically right size or started to attempt to right size the ship. And at the time, we had this product portal server that had reached, it was sort of end of life. It was not necessarily growing, and the team was sort of getting a little tired of doing it. So they wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something different. So I switched in and became sort of the product architect for that portal server, which also at the time we decided to end of life the Sun version and adopt an open source Java portal. It's called LifeRay. You
Mm-hmm.
may have heard of them. And so I was part of the team that sort of did that integration. So we produced a product from Sun that was backed by the LifeRay portal
Mm-hmm.
server, and co-branded it, co-marketed it, co-sold it, with LifeRay and into Sun customers for a couple of years. And then Oracle came along and changed
The
everything.
interesting part, the interesting story about LifeRay is they actually implement or develop the entire LifeRay in a church. So
Yes, it started out in the
yeah, the
church. Yep.
developers of Portal, they worked in the church. They implemented the LifeRay.
Yeah.
This is actually, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. My first trip to out to California, because at that time I had already moved back to Florida. I moved back in, like you said, 2001. So my first trip out to California, the office was actually upstairs at their church, and like the not the basement, but the equivalent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the
Mm-hmm.
attic of the church, and they had a bunch of people just everywhere. It was pretty interesting.
Okay. So they knew that actually Sun used LifeRay. So LifeRay was still very
Yeah.
popular in Germany, but I had no idea that actually Sun also used that. So then you quit Sun, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, Oracle acquired Sun, and they already had 4 portals at
Mm-hmm.
the time. They had the BEA, they had Oracle portal, they had WebLogic, and they had one other one. And so now they had 6, right? They got 2 from Sun. They got our legacy Sun one, which we still hadn't EOL'd, as well as the LifeRay one. So they kind of put all of those into sustaining mode, and we ended up, just kind of helping it along, fixing bugs and whatnot. Um, and it wasn't a great fit culturally. Like when the acquisition happened, there was a question about whether it was going to be Oracle, excuse me, or IBM that was going to acquire Sun, and we all kind of wanted IBM to acquire
Mm-hmm.
Sun because we felt it was a better fit, but it ended up being
Mm-hmm.
Oracle. So it wasn't really a great cultural fit for me. So I spent 6 months there, I think. And then at the time, my manager from Sun was actually working at
Mm-hmm.
LifeRay, ironically, and I went over and joined him at LifeRay. So I worked at LifeRay after that.
Oh,
So I had some experience with the team. Yeah, so it's
I
fortuitous.
didn't knew that. So why I'm asking about Sun, because I know your name, James Faulkner, and I don't know whether it was from Sun time, whether we did something, with maybe a little bit Glassfish or something like back then, or later at Red Hat. So whether we met actually back then at the Sun time.
It's very possible, Adam. It's
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very possible. Um, yeah, COVID kind of erased a lot of my memories.
Yeah, yeah, very possible. So okay, so then you worked with LifeRay. How long then?
So I was at LifeRay for about 5 years, and I was the open source community
Okay.
manager. So I was responsible for, of course, working with customers, but also championing the open source
Mm-hmm.
LifeRay portal and doing, meetups, doing, industry events, talks at industry events, things like that. And also developing the community, building different programs for developers to contribute in different ways, because we didn't just need coders, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
like translations. There was a big translations team. There was a security team where we kind of when we discovered a security vulnerability, this team would be in the loop on that early on, as part of the process of responsibly reporting and fixing issues, and then rolling those patches out. So we had a number of different teams that really encouraged open source community members to contribute back to LifeRay, which was really great to see, because that was sort of the lifeblood of the product, was the open source community of it.
What I remember, I hope it was LifeRay, because I had to perform a code review and had the opportunity to see parts of the LifeRay. And what I remember, there's like a genius developer who implemented a lot of stuff. And there was like, I think OSGI was lots of layers. So they had the layers over layers, like interface, implementation, and everything was like, it looked like almost generated code. And this was mostly just a Vue developer. So I was actually stunned that there was this amount of code. They wrote that consistently. And this is what I remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a generator in there. I know what you're referring to as a service. I think it was called service generator, something like that. So Brian Chan is and was the chief architect of that. And it was very, very consistent in the way that things were done in LifeRay Portal. So every service had all the same kind of class names. And this is the servicing is what was generating that.
Okay. So and then what happened? So you quit at LifeRay.
Yeah, so I worked at LifeRay for 5 years, as I said, and I think the work that I did was, I think, getting to a point where I was kind of doing the same things over and over again, and I kind of wanted to branch out and look at some different career paths. So I just happened to have an opportunity at Red Hat back in 2016, and I'd worked with Red Hat a lot in the past. Even when I was at Sun, right? I think Red Hat was JBoss was a competitor at the time to Glassfish and the Sun Java System Application Server. Great naming, by the way. So I was really familiar with JBoss. I actually attended Red Hat has their flagship event every year called Red Hat Summit, and I actually attended that in 2015 when I was at LifeRay, and I got to see some of the interesting people and culture in Red Hat, and so that kind of helped make that decision as well. So I had an opportunity to join as a product marketing manager. Technically, when I was at LifeRay, I was a community manager, but I was reporting up through the marketing arm, so I had some marketing experience. So this opportunity to be a product marketing manager for a specific product as opposed to an entire community, I thought would be an interesting career choice. So I kind of wanted to give that a whirl. So I joined Red Hat in 2016 as a technical marketing manager in the middleware group.
Whitefly and JBoss.
So
Whitefly and JBoss, right? Or JBoss mainly.
Yeah, it's primarily every one of our middleware products at the time, I think, was marketed or was branded with the JBoss term, because Red Hat acquired JBoss in 2006. So they got like the app server, they got a web server, they got identity, they got a number of different products with the JBoss moniker, business process management.
Okay, so what was your job? Just to promote JBoss?
Yeah, primarily building. So the TMM or the marketing manager position in a product's business unit is primarily to support sales, right? So building demos and workshops for sales, building enablement material, supporting new releases as they come out, and enabling our sales field to understand the product and understand its capabilities and benefits to customers, and be able to translate that into meeting the customer need, whatever that might be. So that's a primary job. The other job was to obviously to do like developer evangelism, going to events, doing talks, doing podcasts, things like that. And then last one is to sort of build internal and external product champions for your given product. So we have a number of customers today at Red Hat that there's one person or a handful of people inside of our customer base that are sort of Red Hat champions, like not just for our middleware, but also for things like OpenShift and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, of course. And so our job there is to also build them up and give them the tools that they need to continue to benefit with Red Hat technology and apply it in different use cases in their given companies.
I used to Whitefly actually a lot, and JBoss as well. So it was a huge success story, actually. The JBoss and Whitefly, no kidding, because was the first application server who actually competed with the commercial ones. So this was the story. And and what is your what happens between back then with JBoss and now? So you're still working with JBoss or more Quarkus, or what's? Yeah,
so we are. So the the focus is of course remains on our application development product line, and that includes JBoss and now new things like you mentioned, like Quarkus, as well as how it integrates with the rest of the Red Hat portfolio. So we're not an island. We don't exist just to sell JBoss. We exist to build an inclusive community of Red Hat technologists and showcase how our entire portfolio works together, not just one or two products. So we do a lot of work with showcasing integrations with like RHEL and with OpenShift, and of course with Ansible as well. And so, because like Red Hat has been historically, it's an infrastructure company, right? We started with RHEL, and we're really good at selling RHEL or taking RHEL orders. But nothing happens in a business without applications. So you can have the best operating system on the planet, but with no applications, you're going to get zero benefit from it. So we're focusing more on the app dev space and showcasing how Red Hat's platforms are able to solve that app dev challenge, and not just in writing programs or whatnot, but actually delivering them to production safely and consistently. And so that's the middleware component of that, whether that's JBoss or whether that's Quarkus, or whether that's Fuse or 3Scale, any of all of our middleware products, they all contribute to that end goal of Red Hat as an application delivery platform.
And this is your job right now as well.
Yeah, that's correct.
So what is then the ideal Java stack at Red Hat? So if I would like to pick all the Red Hat products, I would like to build, let's say, a small microservice which sells gators, let's say alligators in Florida, right? So and like a pet store in Florida. So I would say a Quarkus or Whitefly. Then what is the commercial offering for Keycloak? I would say Identity Manager, right? So what would be the ideal stack? Ansible for provisioning. So I'm just curious. What you will suggest to get fully supported? This is what I'm interested in. Not open source, of course open source, but fully supported commercial stack from Red Hat.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So it all starts with the operating system, right? So Red Hat Enterprise
Which
Linux.
version? No.
That's your base stack. We're currently version 9. 9. I don't know what the actual patch
9
level
is
is at this point, but 9 is enough. Yeah. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux is that base, and that that kind of marries a lot of the hardware vendors with software vendors, or with ISV software that's certified to run on RHEL, and or potentially in containers, and we'll get to that in a minute. But we do a lot of work to make RHEL really consistent and really able to support a number of different platforms, like infrastructure platforms like the cloud and our hardware vendors. We do a lot of work to make RHEL consistent so that everything else above that can vary depending on customer need. So I'll give you, a classic example is like a RHEL customer who maybe they're not interested in containers, right? They don't care about Kubernetes. They just want to run their banking software on RHEL. We're super happy to do that, and they're super happy with RHEL because it's consistent and it's secured and supported and ... So all starts with RHEL. Then an ideal stack for the microservice example, the pet store that you mentioned, you'd have a way to deliver that application. First of all, you have a way to write it. So you need like if it's a Java framework we're talking about, then I would obviously, when you say microservices, I immediately think about Quarkus. Given its stunning performance and the developer productivity that comes along with that. So writing a Quarkus app and then getting that into production is where OpenShift and Ansible come along. So OpenShift is your orchestration layer, obviously, but it also has capabilities for building and delivering through pipelines, containers to production or to test or to dev environments. It has a range of developer tooling. Like online IDEs based on VS Code.
So VS Code would be the preferred IDE right now, right?
So in my opinion, yes. There's a lot of support for lots of things in VS Code, and Microsoft, they spend a lot of money making sure that thing is solid and consistent. Obviously, it integrates well with the Microsoft stack, but from an app dev perspective, I think there's a lot of value there. It's not light years ahead or behind of like IntelliJ. But in my opinion, it's very easy to use. And
I can confirm that. So actually today I use, Visual Studio Code with Quarkus without OpenShift, just, bare metal, and it just worked. add Quarkus extension, and you get the extension and works well. So
Yeah, exactly. And that's my personal preference, but like I said, right, we have support for IntelliJ,
Sure.
we have support for even traditional Eclipse. You name
Yeah,
it,
but there's no
VI or
in
Vim.
Visual Studio Code. There is the Red Hat extensions, which are based on Microsoft extensions.
Yep.
So you get the entire stack of plugins there. So I was curious. Okay,
Yep.
and Ansible is for setting up OpenShift automation, right?
So yeah, historically Ansible was for automating those data center operations, like deploying JBoss or even deploying OpenShift itself was deployed with Ansible back in the 3.x heritage. So yeah, Ansible's great at automating those small tasks, but now it's also moving into doing things like introducing essentially event-driven programming, where you can have Ansible playbooks that are triggered by events, and you can kind of set up a whole flow of actions that happen depending on event input, whether that's a developer checking in a piece of code or some threshold being met in some machinery somewhere. You can do a lot of cool things with event-driven Ansible. And then of course you may have seen the announcement last week at IBM Think with their Watson X, where they've rebranded their Watson line. One of those components is the Watson Code Assistant, which we actually demoed. A colleague of mine, Katie, was on stage with the CEO of IBM demoing this capability for Watson X or Code Generator to generate Ansible code based on input, like human input. Like, give me a playbook that does X, Y, Z. Or you start the beginning of a playbook and you give it a name of like, deploy this application to production server 4. Then you hit tab and like fills out this entire playbook with the variable values already set based on the company specific playbooks that they use to deploy. It was pretty interesting. So Ansible was really branching out into the
so the
space.
Watson X was trained on the closed Ansible, how to call it, projects, and this is why it works as well, right?
Yeah, it's called the foundational models, which are used to train basic knowledge, and then you can make that better by feeding it your corporate Ansible playbook set by pointing at a GitHub repo, and it just ingests it all and then figures out what it is and processes it, so that when you then make a request later on saying, give me this playbook to do this company specific task, it will be able to do that.
Which is really interesting. What
cool.
I thought, the future of AI, or the useful nature of AI would be if I could point the AI, to my code, to my repositories, it will learn, my patterns, and I could use my own patterns and then refine them, for instance, right? This is really interesting, because right now I use a GitHub Copilot, and sometimes it worked, but, in 80% of all cases, the code was somehow useful, but I had still, to change a lot, because it produced, like chatty Java code, so it was not really efficient. So I didn't like the code, but it worked. But then I deactivated that because I said, okay, come on, it was not nice try, but I will wait, a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been experimenting with that with Quarkus as well. We've been having it create like basic Quarkus programs and see what kind of best practices it gives you out of the box. In some cases, it's fine, but in other cases, it might not be so fine. Like we asked it to generate a let's see, I can't remember. It was something like we had a Tomcat app, and we wanted to have the equivalent written for Quarkus, and it basically spit out like it uses like the servlet API, and it's like that. If I were to rewrite an application that is a servlet based application in Tomcat today, I probably might use something different in Quarkus, something that's more native, and but it just, we did this experiment with ChatGPT. It just doesn't have the knowledge yet necessary to put us all out of jobs.
Yeah, I think the problem is lots of Java code out there is just not outdated. It is somehow too formal. It is not modern enough. I think it will, if it will scan the internet in 5 years, it will be different. But right now, the old layered code with lots of plumbing is just dominant on the internet, and this is what ChatGPT learned.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see in 5 years what happens, because like if everyone starts using ChatGPT and uses the generated code from it as is, right, it's just going to get worse. It's just going to be like bit rot over time. I saw a funny quote. I can't remember who it was earlier today. About ChatGPT. It was like, in order for ChatGPT to, and I'm paraphrasing here, but in order for ChatGPT to successfully write a program, the designers or the customer needs to be able to give accurate requirements.
Yeah.
And then he said, we're all safe. Like, if customers can't, they don't know what they want. So.
But interesting side note on the entire AI and ChatGPT and stuff like that. I think you have to be, it's almost like autopilot in a car. You have to be extremely careful and you watch, entire time the road. So if it generates the code, you have to say, okay, is it good enough? Okay, you have to be extremely focused. Then you can be hyper productive. But I think you have to be a really good programmer, lots of experience to know whether the code could work or not. Otherwise, you get lost because it will generate you tons of code and no one will understand what happened, right? Because I'm really interesting. It is. You remember, the trend to offshore back then. There was in Europe where say, okay, we will just create this spec and someone will implement that, and it never worked because there was lots of information got lost. And you got the code back, and no one understood what happened, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the job of developers and programmers are safe for another several generations.
Even safer, I would say, if you're interested, right? So I think there will be maybe a short, how to call it, distortion of the force, right? And then everything is back to normal or even better. So this what can happen, right? But it's still interesting.
Yeah.
So okay, so we already covered Ansible. And what's interesting is the event-driven stuff, which fits well to the cloud. So because the entire cloud is event-driven, so you can react to events and then automate, what happens after so like more like a pipeline almost, right? So if this event happens, then this and this and this, on commit to that. Very interesting, interesting idea. And then OpenShift, which is nicer to use Kubernetes. So I don't get why someone would like to use Kubernetes, just plain. So I would say OpenShift or Wrench is the way to go. And I like OpenShift a lot. I still like it. And if I have so maybe what's OpenShift is like Kubernetes with some, opinionated Kubernetes, right? So you have Docker registry already. You have the ingress controller already working, and you have nice command line interface. So I really liked OpenShift, actually. And so,
I think it brings in about 50 different products or projects, open source projects into there, not just with networking, but also, like you said, pipelines and like
Keycloak is there, identity management, right?
Keycloak is there, Keycloak. So the Red Hat official name for the supported version is the Red Hat build of Keycloak, or will be named that very soon.
Red Hat build of Keycloak.
Just like we have the Red Hat build of Quarkus. And
it was not like Red Hat Identity Manager one day?
So there is an identity manager product. I'm not too familiar with it at Red Hat. I believe it started and is primarily run on RHEL systems. That now Red Hat SSO, the productized version of Keycloak is, it implements a similar kind of thing where you can have your identity database with your users, and then you can have like federated single sign-on for your different APIs. Then also does like social sign-on with like Google and Facebook.
But
and
what I'm curious, Keycloak, the Red Hat version of Keycloak, and this would run on OpenShift, right? So if there's like a, do you have how it is called, not orchestrator, what's the name in Kubernetes? Operator, exactly.
Yeah, Kubernetes operator.
And it will run Keycloak out of the box, so it will cluster it properly and it will run and patch. Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
That's right. That's very similar to our other middleware products like JBoss CAP as well. We have an operator for that. And that will kind of set up the automatic clustering and graceful shutdown if you have in-flight transactions and you shut things down or you scale down. They can also do auto scaling.
It's actually a brilliant case for Kubernetes because for application developers, Kubernetes is terrible if you have to use it directly, with all the YAML. But for you as a platform provider, it's great because with the operators you can have install exe. You can just drop something and it works. Then a Streamz, right, for Kafka.
Yep, Streamz for Kafka.
Is it like operator for Kubernetes for Kafka, right?
Yep, Streamz is the operator for Kafka.
Yeah. Okay. There is a Prometheus built in. Is it right?
Yep. And I believe there's an operator for that as well. But yeah, that's and you can use that for both metrics on the cluster itself as well as your application metrics. So your open telemetries and things.
Is
like that.
Jaeger integrated? You know it?
Yeah, the distributed tracing. So it's available. I'm not. Actually, it is integrated into OpenShift as well, and you can again use it for your applications.
So there's actually great story. So you get your own little cloud which belongs to you, right? So you get
Yeah, the observability stack is pretty well fleshed out with
Mm-hmm.
OpenShift, which is awesome. In the early days, it was only used for cluster metrics and telemetry and observability, but now it's starting to be available for application developers as well. So you don't have to bring your own Jaeger, you bring your own Prometheus. You just drop a Kubernetes
Mm-hmm.
object with a small amount of YAML, and you'll just
Mm-hmm.
magically get an instance that you can start using.
And now the unfair question. So what about something like Postgres? Do you have a story there? So could you just pick Postgres and find an operator and run it OpenShift?
Yeah, you can. So there's a whole library of certified
Mm-hmm.
operators and certified container images, and Postgres is one of them. Red Hat's not a database company, so we certainly partner with all
Yeah,
of the
sure.
popular databases. Some of them we prefer more than others, but yeah, we can support a number of different types of databases, Mongo and
Yeah,
SQL
but
Server.
the Postgres is very popular one. It is always the question of client,
Yeah,
how to run Postgres on OpenShift.
yeah, that's the one I always use too as well. And there's an operator for that. It's even easier than that. When you log into the OpenShift
Mm-hmm.
console, there's a big plus button, and you can just say add a Postgres database, and it
What you
deploys
will
it.
suggest? Which operator or what to run Postgres?
Um, if there's an operator available, which I believe there is, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
100% sure, but I'm pretty sure there is. I would use an
Okay.
operator before I would do it myself
Yeah, sure.
because it
Mm-hmm.
handles all of the operational
Mm-hmm.
aspects, and it's very easy. And it also it's like if you change a configuration out from under it, it will
Mm-hmm.
undo that, which is awesome. So you can
Mm-hmm.
minimize the configuration
Yeah.
drift.
And you get with the I think Red Hat satellites, the patching for everything, right? So there's like the software is patched, from outside like a cache. It's called satellite, right? Still. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That's Red Hat Satellite that's primarily for telemetry and patching of RHEL
Mm-hmm.
itself. OpenShift also has the capability of different streams that you can subscribe
Mm-hmm.
to, in air quotes, so that you can get like a stable stream, or you can get last up to date like unstable changes if you
Mm-hmm.
want. So you can kind of subscribe your systems to those different
Mm-hmm.
streams. So yeah, it's easy to keep your OpenShift deployment up to
So I
date.
think we covered the entire stack, right? So we covered, the load balancers already built in. So we had Kafka with StreamZ, Postgres with the built-in operator, Prometheus, X-Ray, OpenShift, Ansible for automation, even event-driven automation. So we could do on overload, for instance, Ansible could start new nodes, right? This would be.
Yep. And then beyond that, when you start talking about like multiple clusters, like not just one OpenShift cluster, but say you have a fleet of 1,000
Mhm.
clusters, that's probably on an extremely high end. But what's the story there? Like how do you manage and how do you deploy new clusters? How do you start and stop them? How do you communicate between clusters? And that's where products like the ACM, the Advanced Cluster Manager, based on the Open Cluster Manager
Mhm.
project, which allows you to define policies. You can roll applications out using a combination of ACM and Argo
Mhm.
CD, or OpenShift GitOps as we call it. And that's really really useful for rolling out multi-component applications across multiple
Mhm.
clusters. Because once you start getting into that scale, you can't do it with
Mhm.
a couple of
Mhm.
bash scripts. You really need to have automation, and have automation in a way that's sort of Kubernetes
Mhm.
native, aware of Kubernetes objects, aware of the reconciliation loop of operators and things like that. So it's a very good way to do larger scale automation of applications as you deploy
Mhm.
them out to multiple different
Mhm.
environments. And then of course there's then the question is like, okay, so now you're deploying to 1,000 clusters. Now you've suddenly made your attack surface huge. Like you've got multiple clusters running all kinds of code. Like how do you secure
Mhm.
that? Because back in the days of monoliths running on a data center VM, that's pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but it's pretty straightforward on how
Mhm.
you secure that. When you start branching out into multiple cloud providers, maybe some edge devices here and there, like that's where the security story gets really really
Mhm.
complex. And so we actually acquired a company called StackRox a few years ago, that has this product that basically does security monitoring and policy enforcement across multiple clusters. And so that is something you would definitely need in your stack. And the preferred stack from Red Hat, of course, would be OpenShift and the Advanced Cluster
And
Security
and
product.
is StackRock open sourced?
That I That's a good question. I believe so. It wasn't when we acquired them, but pretty sure that
because this is interesting.
I know
Is
there's a
what
plan.
Red Hat does. It acquires software and then open sources it. So this is actually an interesting story always to watch. And how we can imagine, the policy enforcement. So, I mean, what it does exactly.
Yeah, it is open source. So just first of all, we did open source it last year. I just want to make sure, because I know whenever we acquire a company, that's always the first question, always without fail. And in the time I've been at Red Hat, the answer was always yes.
Exactly.
We have a plan to do it. Just give us time. So that happened. So what was the second question?
What I can imagine, I'm a Java developer, so what means in policy enforcement? So what happens exactly there?
So there are some standards out there that I'm not super familiar with, but they're like NIST standards and a few others. And those standards specify, obviously what it means to, what a policy, how you define a policy, like what does that mean? And so in implementation terms, it means things like you can, like the simplest one that we use in demos, because it's like out of the box, is like you have to have this particular operator always installed on every cluster. And so if you go and deploy a cluster that doesn't have that thing, then the policy manager is going to recognize that in a short amount of time, and you can either set it to fix it or just set it to like inform and mark a cluster as like out of policy. If you set it to fix, it's actually going to go in there and install that operator. You can do the same thing with namespaces. You can do the same thing with like cluster limits, like the memory and CPU limits and things like that. So it's very easy to be able to define these policies. And there's actually a little GUI that can help you construct these policies in there.
It's more like opinionated best practice enforcer or something like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's like it's kind of dumb, but there's like a little drop down, and it has like 12 out of the box policies that you can use as sort of starting points. But again, these are based on standards, and so you can always write your own and import those into the tool and then apply those across your cluster as well. And you can define how it gets applied, like which clusters, like based on like labels or attributes of the cluster or anything like that. So it's very flexible.
Another question, because I use Jenkins a lot on OpenShift, and the Jenkins is really well integrated with OpenShift. There was like a specific flavor which you can install, and it worked actually really well because you could deploy from Jenkins. All the plugins were already there. The security identity was already solved. So will Ansible replace Jenkins, or Jenkins will, or is still, what's the story there?
So no technology ever truly dies. Like it's always like additive. So we always see.
But
like
what you will do
right?
in
so
a fresh
Jenkins
project, in a greenfield project, still use Jenkins or more Ansible. This was the.
So well, I would actually use pipelines like Tekton, because that can do a similar job, right? It's like it's a CI solution, and it can build. You can have pipelines that build your projects on your cluster or on some remote worker, and then you can store those in your enterprise container registry and then deploy those from there. And so Tekton is very powerful and as flexible. I don't know that it has the same number of plugins as Jenkins, but it is a truly Kubernetes native project, and it's the one that OpenShift prefers.
Okay, because the most interesting plugins on OpenShift for Jenkins were the OpenShift integration. Yeah.
But like I said, nothing ever dies, so we still support it. We have we have a huge ISV ecosystem on OpenShift, and Jenkins is part of that as well. So there's sort of competing solutions with different components. Like there's an alternate pipelines thing with Jenkins. There's an alternate service mesh. There's an alternate identity
I'm just curious to know if you say Tekton. So it means that Tekton ships with similar integration like Jenkins, right? I don't have to care about the identity, so it already runs in the specific role. So this is the most important thing, because otherwise it gets messy with the credentials and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's built into OpenShift from the get-go. So when you run a pipeline, it runs in a particular role, which is initialized when you installed OpenShift, and you can of course customize that as well. So it's very flexible, and it uses the same RBAC concepts in the rest of Kubernetes.
Very good. Exactly. This was the the killer feature of how to call it, OpenShift extended Jenkins. This was the built-in Jenkins which I use all the time. Okay, and now you did something strange. You migrated JBoss or even Quarkus to Azure, right? You helped with the migration.
Yep. So we So with EAP, so EAP and Jakarta EE in general, right, it's a mature and well-known entity, well-known market. So we have a lot of customers that have been running JBoss for 2 decades almost, close to 2 decades, maybe some more. But so lots of customers running in data centers, and now in the last 5 years, we've started to really see an increase in mandates for them to move to the cloud. So we wanted to make our mature products like EAP available to those customers as they're moving, because we want to obviously keep them as customers, but we also want to keep Java first and foremost in enterprise developers' minds. So we want to make our products easily consumable in the cloud providers like Azure and AWS. So we now made EAP available on Azure and AWS as well. So you can pay as you go. You no longer have to buy, a traditional software subscription. You can pay, I think the last price I saw was something like 18 cents per core per hour. And you can run your applications on AWS or Azure. We're also looking at Google Cloud Platform. We also have support for IBM Cloud, obviously. But yeah, so EAP is available there. Now that's a traditional VM-based offer. So you can SSH into the machine. You can make changes. They are persisted. It's just like running a VM in your data center, but you're running it on Azure, and you're able to use your committed spend. That's another piece of this puzzle, is that with these cloud mandates that our customers, and I'm guessing your customers as well, are getting, they are also coming along with, hey, we dedicated $10 million of budget next year for Azure, so we need to spend against that. And so if your products aren't able to consume that, then you're not going to be able to sell them into that customer. So we want to make sure that these committed spend programs in the cloud providers are enabled with our products. So we did that as well with EAP. And then we also, back before Kubernetes, right, we talked a lot about platform as a service or PaaS solutions. Like Cloud Foundry had one. They actually did pretty good. Their challenge was that it was very, very limited to like 12-factor apps only. And so a lot of our customers thought Cloud Foundry was pretty cool, but they couldn't really move any of their existing apps over because it was this limited thing. But with EAP on Azure, we did want to make it available through their PaaS. So they have this PaaS called Azure App Service. And it's, as far as I know, the only major cloud provider that provides, essentially, you could call it like Jakarta EE as a service. And so you can have, and we work very closely with like Reza and the rest of the guys from Microsoft, Ed Burns as well, to make EAP available through their PaaS. And this is a really great option for customers who just want, they don't have huge configuration requirements, not very complex configurations for their Jakarta apps, and they also don't want to fool with like managing the app server itself. Maybe they have an app that's been running for 10 years successfully, but now they have to move it to the cloud, and they don't want to have to manage it on the cloud themselves. So we made that available through Azure App Service as well. So and it also integrates out of the box with a number of other Azure services like Azure App Insights. So if your application generates metrics, which JBoss apps do out of the box, then you can start getting telemetry very easily out of the box with that solution. So it also integrates with like their databases, as well as other databases like Postgres, and with their message queues. So they have JMS support on Azure directly, which you can then wire into your application. So it's a very nice solution, turnkey solution for Jakarta EE. In fact, you may be familiar with the new Jakarta EE starter site that was just launched a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. That's actually running on JBoss on App Service. So it's a good use case for that. It's like it's a relatively simple app, right? It generates starter applications, and it's a great use case for a PaaS with Jakarta EE. So
what's interesting is on premise you have OpenShift, which is Kubernetes. On Azure, you choose to use Azure App Service, which is excellent choice, by the way. So what I don't understand, to run Kubernetes in the cloud, because Azure is already a cloud and Kubernetes is a cloud, and running a cloud in a cloud is a little bit, what I compare it always. Some clients back then ran, Spring in Whitefly, and I say, you are all crazy. Why are you doing this? Now we have two completely independent dependency injection frameworks in one container. Why are you doing this? Either run Spring or run Whitefly, but not both at the same time. And this is the same. I never got the idea why someone would like to run Kubernetes on Azure or AWS, unless they already invested in operators or whatever. So there's an obvious choice, right? But if you starting on greenfield, I would say Azure App Service or Azure Container Apps would be actually the way to go. So what I'm curious, how you did it? You used the Bicep programming language, to provision the entire stuff? Mm-hmm.
Well, that Bicep is used in our VM-based offers. On Azure App Service, they have their own, like, I don't know if I could call it proprietary, but their own fabric that sits underneath. It's container-based. So they have a container, some rudimentary container. Well, maybe rudimentary is a strong word, but it's not Kubernetes as far as I know. But it is a container-based thing. And so ultimately your application is running in a container, but that surface is not exposed to developers, nor should it be, because if you want to use it as a true PaaS, you shouldn't have to care about the underlying infrastructure being used there.
Okay, so let's say we have our alligator pet store in a war, and we would like to run it on Azure App Service. So how this would look like? So what is do actually?
Yeah, so just like let me think of a good analogy. Normally you would start up a Jakarta EE server like JBoss EAP on-prem, and then you would drop your WAR file into some directory, and it would get deployed. So in this case, instead of running it yourself, you're basically going to order a copy. You're going to order an instance of JBoss on App Service, and what that's going to do is deploy EAP and start it up for you, and then you'll have it's represented as a first-class entity on the Azure portal. And you'll have endpoints that you can connect to. You can download log files from EAP. You can kind of get at the guts of EAP. Now it's effectively your management console. It's JBoss EAP has a built-in management console. That's essentially disabled because you're using App Service as the management console to control like number of instances and things like that. So with the next phase then to deploy the actual application to this running instance is basically to upload it, effectively putting it into a directory. But Microsoft has abstracted that into so you use the developer tool of choice. So there's a CLI, there's the AZ CLI. AZ web app is the command you would use, AZ web app deploy, and then you point at your WAR file and it would basically upload that into JBoss and initialize and run the app. And then you can access it at the app's endpoint. You can also use the IDE extensions for VS Code. That's a great choice because there is a complete Azure plugins for VS Code. And from there, you could basically just right-click on your WAR file and say deploy to this particular app service. So that's an easy way to do it. The third way is to use Maven. So there's Maven integration. If you add a dependency to your project, or add a plugin to your Maven POM file, you can then deploy through that, and it will ask you like the name of the resource group, the name of your application, what version of Java do you want to use, what version of EAP do you want to use, and probably most importantly, what machine SKU you want to use, right? How many CPUs, how much memory do you want to use? And the more memory and CPU, obviously, the higher the price, but it's a nice interactive way of deploying your application to App Service.
Do you have to know, the SKUs up front, or you can change it later?
You can change it later. Yeah, so that the SKUs are collected into what's called an App Service plan, and you can change that on the fly as well if you want to save money or.
Because it would be a great job for Ansible, event-driven Ansible,
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And App Service. Yeah,
because you could actually couple this with Azure Insights, and depending on the load, you can say you could just start or add more or less CPUs to it.
Yep. You could. App Service actually has a built-in scaling in and scaling out, so or up and down, however you want to say it, based on that load or based on time of day or something like that, where you can start adding and removing instances. And the other good thing about some recent work we've been doing, when we first launched this, we actually launched this last year, but it did not have clustering support because we did not have the logic in place to deal with scaling down in particular. And so we now have added that in the latest release, and we're going to be releasing that, messaging that very soon, announcing it very soon. The way app service gets new features, it's a bit of a lengthy process. You can't just throw a switch and then magically everyone across the world gets it, because it's a huge business for Microsoft, and so they have lots and lots of customers on app service. So to roll out a new version of app service, or to roll out a new version of EAP with a different feature set, it takes a month or two to get it rolled out globally because of the rolling nature of that update. So yeah, but that's available today or very soon, the clustering capability, and that was a big one.
Scaling down indeed is a challenge, because what you have to, the question is what happens with already existing connections, right? So you have to wait until no one will connect to this node.
And transactions.
So it's not that easy, actually.
It is not that easy. And that's actually one thing that the EAP operator on Kubernetes handles today. So that's sort of replicating that a little bit. But App Service has that built-in capability.
Because on OpenShift, what I remember back then is it just, scale depending on CPU on the load. But what you could do is you could have a smarter, how to call it, scaling, because you could expose microprofile metrics or Prometheus metrics with business metrics, and OpenShift could, use the business metrics, which is more meaningful, because you could say, up to, if there are more than 10 orders per minute, let's say, then scale up. And regardless what the CPU is doing. And this is what I thought, with Azure App Service, because then you could use Ansible. But I don't think, that Azure App Service is capable to look into your business metrics, right?
Yeah, I'd have to go look into that, because I know there's a way to do custom metrics. I just don't know if you could write basically like a bash script that say, run this script, and if it outputs, more than one, then scale up. Something like that, where you could have a custom hook. I don't think that's there, but I have to look. But yeah, I think most people are looking at scaling based on CPU or memory.
With the AZ web app deploy, JBoss became serverless, right? If you think about this, because the war is very similar to Azure Functional Lambda. I mean, there's just the business logic. You just push it somewhere. You can dedicate the amount of compute. You can say configure how much processing resources you need, and it is how it should be. I don't know whether you remember, at Sun Microsystems, Sun announced the Sun Grid back then. It was like the predecessor of the cloud, and I was really disappointed, because hey, what's going on? They really have application servers. What I assume is this is what you are introducing right now. I thought something like an Azure App Service. I would say just run your Sun application server, and I would just copy the war over. My expectation is that you will care about that, and instead the Sun Grid was like you have to package a zip, which was the entire application without any separation between infrastructure and business logic, and you have to package, and this was like 2005 or whatever, and this was so a question regarding
we've learned a lot.
Sorry.
We've learned a lot since then.
And I assume on AWS are using Fargate, right?
Like for JBoss? No, it's just on the Azure AWS Marketplace deployed as
VMs. Okay, I thought this was ECS or Fargate is what my assumption, because
no. Our AWS offer is not a PaaS. That is a traditional marketplace VM based offer.
Because this would be also easily doable on ECS Fargate.
Yeah, I'm sure it's possible. Also on Elastic Beanstalk. I don't know if you remember that. I think that's still around. I actually deployed. I got LifeWay running on that at one point. It's pretty interesting. Lots of interest in that.
So what Elastic
Beanstalk
is just doing is just more like almost like Ansible, right? So it just orchestrates the entire AWS infrastructure behind the scenes, and the ECS is a little bit more lighter weight, and AppRunner could be interesting. I think it's called AppRunner, right?
AppRunner
from AWS.
Yeah, that can run Java apps. And anything that can run Java, and by the way, App Service can also just run bare, basic Java, like a Quarkus microservice or a Spring microservice. But the EAP is, obviously for a different type of workload than your traditional.
But for Quarkus could be also interesting. Azure App Service, the same story.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a lot closer to a serverless pattern than I would say for EAP. But yeah, Quarkus makes a lot of sense.
Not
there
necessarily,
as well.
James.
Now,
so, why? Because in Whitefly, if you think about this, the war is just my business logic. There's almost no code, no dependencies, and the infrastructure is somewhere else. With Quarkus, we have our entire runtime in the jar. So it is lighter weight, but from the serverless perspective, I would say even the old war is closer than Quarkus. I would prefer Quarkus, but from the serverless, how to call it, philosophy, I would say the War and Whitefly fits a little bit better.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Logically, it does fit better. It's just the startup time and memory, I think, is not what you would expect from a serverless solution.
Hey, with Quarkus, you could even do crazy things like you submit the jar and you could create a Graal VM and then run it behind the scenes. So you could
cool. Could. Absolutely. Yep. And in all these solutions, we basically it's a continuum of how much control do you want. Like if you want ultimate control, go for the VM option where you're in complete control of everything, including patching the app server. If you just want like effectively like a serverless thing that you just mentioned, that's where app service comes in, and then Kubernetes is somewhere in the middle.
Great question. Are you patching the JBosses running on Azure App Service?
Yep, we are. We do. We will.
And is it like you have a maintenance window where they are just patched, or how it is working?
So the way it works is when you deploy EAP on app service, you get to choose whether you want to be pinned to that specific version or you want to float it. If you float it, then every time you reboot, if there's a new version, you're going to get the new version. If you pin it, then we'll never change the version out from under you until you're ready.
And when you reboot, when you have to reboot the servers?
Like if there's a like if you scale up and down.
Okay.
So if there's any need to reboot, like there's a manual reboot button. But anytime the thing boots, it would get that new version if you so choose. I would imagine, and I would highly recommend if you're running in production to not use that option, and manually control when a new version gets patched for you.
I actually don't know because you say this, but the other possibility would be to behave like the chaos monkey. You say just test it all the time. And constantly reboot the application servers, and then this is a part of the testing strategy. Could be.
That's true. That is very true. And there's a capability on App Service for deployment slots where you can do things like that, like testing ahead of time before you swap it into production. So you could set one blade or whatever they call it to auto update every time, and use that for your chaos monkey. Or you could do it in production. You only live once, right?
Interesting. Actually. It's a great service. So maybe last question. What is the minimal configuration for the JBoss? Like one CPU or half CPU and 128 meg RAM, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually did some testing because we're looking at, so right now when you buy, you have to buy, it's not free. And we want to add a free tier. We want to so Azure has this free tier and it's very limited. It's like you get 1 gigabyte of memory and you get 60 minutes of CPU per day. So you're not going to run a production server on there. But we wanted to make sure that it would fit in that. And so we did a lot of testing. Well, not a lot, but a reasonable amount of testing to make sure that like a Hello World app would fit. And it certainly did fit. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 180 megs or 200 megabytes of memory. And I think it was given one vCPU or maybe half the vCPU. The vCPU is not as important. I mean, obviously, if you have less vCPU, it's going to run slower, but it's still going to work. It's the memory is what the limiting factor is. So the smallest machine you can get is 1 gig. So that's plenty of space.
Yeah. And can you actually have 1 gig with one vCPU? Is it possible?
Yeah, you can.
Because, for instance, on Fargate, it is, if you would like to have, CPU, you have to buy it with memory. You cannot just, combine any amount of memory of RAM with CPU. So there's like relation between CPU and RAM.
Yeah, and now Azure, their free tier is exactly that. It's 1 gig and one CPU. But I don't know if it's like software limited or if it's I don't think they have a 1 gig 1 CPU machine that's running these workloads. So
and what is the larger configuration? The largest configuration you can get?
I mean, it can. I don't know what the largest is. It's massive.
Okay, so like how many CPUs?
Crazy high. So when you run that, we have recommended. We have like 6 different machine sizes, and I think the largest one we recommend is 64 gigabytes and like 8 vCPU or something like that.
Just enough for.
So, but you can go larger.
Alligator store.
Yeah.
Thank you. Exactly. It was a nice conversation, and we cover a lot of ground. Actually, we were really efficient.
Awesome. Yeah. Great talking to you again. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. Anytime again. So I should re-invite you back, talk about, Quarkus and Whitefly, what happens on Red Hat. It's like a periodic sync.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Where people can find you on the internet? Where is your work? Twitter and your.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, SCHTOOL or Stuhl.
Wow.
Sounds like a German word a little bit, doesn't it? But it's not. It's actually was a word that was invented by my German roommate when I was working at Sun. I don't even know why he said that. He's just randomly shouting German words to confuse me, I think. But awesome guy. And so that's my Twitter handle. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Most of my work is working with our customers, so I don't get out as much as I'd like. But I do occasionally post there, and we have a developer blog as well that I post at on Red Hat on developers.redhat.com.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.